I pulled a couple cards for Kimani Latig to see, what exactly happened to her, who did who did something to her, and if she is still alive or if she is no longer with us.
She was sitting at a stop sign in broad daylight in her own car, and someone walked up and shot her dead. No warning, no struggle reported. Just a Tuesday afternoon in East St. Louis, a red light, and a 24-year-old mother who never made a home to her two kids. What happened to Kajha Johnson on June 3rd, 2026 didn't look like a random act of violence. Within 48 hours, police had a name.
Tonight, this Swansea woman now faces charges in an East St. Louis murder. Illinois State Police say Brion Bess is the person who pulled the trigger, shooting and killing Nikaja Johnson.
Within 48 hours, a 23-year-old woman from a nearby suburb was sitting in a jail cell charged with first-degree murder. And the question that nobody has been able to answer publicly, the question that is eating at everyone who's followed this case, is why? Why did Kajha have to die? What was the connection? What happened in the hours, days, or weeks before that stop sign that led to this moment? We're going to dig into everything we know, everything that's been pieced together from police records, family statements, and investigative reporting. And I promise you, by the end of this, you're going to have more questions than answers, and that's exactly why we need to talk about it. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something. If you believe that victims like Kajha deserve to have their stories told, not just a headline, not just a mugshot, but a real human story with weight and truth behind it, then hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Mystora Crimes. Click the bell so you never miss a story like this one. These cases don't stay in the news long. The algorithms move on. But we don't. We stay. We dig. We remember. So if you're with us on that, show it. Now let's get into it. Kajha, a.k.a. Johnson, was 24 years old. She was from Belleville, Illinois, right on the edge of the St. Louis metro area, one of those mid-sized suburbs that feels simultaneously close to everything and far from the attention of the wider world. She had two children, two kids who are now being raised by their grandmother. Let that land for a second. Her mother, Brandy Stanback, described her publicly after her death. And what she said wasn't the kind of generic language people reach for when grief is too big to hold. She said Kajha lit up every room she walked into. She said she had an infectious laugh, a fearless spirit, and the kind of generosity that meant she would literally give someone the shirt off her back without hesitating. She called her smart, responsible, a go-getter, not just a good person, but someone with direction, someone building something. That detail matters. Because when you're trying to understand a case like this, one of the first things we have to ask is, who is this person in the world? What was their daily life? What were they moving toward? And Kajha, by every account from the people who loved her, was moving forward. She had people who needed her, two children, a mother who clearly adored her, a family that is now shattered by her absence. She was not a person living on the margins, not someone without roots. She was embedded in the lives of people who loved her deeply. And she was in her car, stopped at an intersection at just after 1 in the afternoon on a Wednesday when her life ended. The location matters too. The intersection of Ridge Avenue and North 25th Street in East St. Louis is not a hidden, isolated spot. It's a real street with real traffic in the middle of the day. This was not a late-night confrontation in a dark parking lot. This was a shooting that happened when the sun was up, when people could be watching, when the world was moving. That level of brazenness, if this was indeed a targeted act, tells you something about the mindset of whoever pulled that trigger. It tells you that either they weren't thinking about consequences, or they genuinely believed they wouldn't face any. Police responded immediately. The East St. Louis Police Department was on the scene, and they recognized almost right away that they needed more resources. They reached out to the Illinois State Police Division of Criminal Investigation, specifically a unit called the Public Safety Enforcement Group. These are specialized agents. This isn't your standard patrol response. Calling in PSEG tells you that from very early on, investigators were treating this as something that required serious investigative weight. Kajha was rushed to a nearby hospital. She didn't make it. She was pronounced dead, leaving behind two children and a mother who now had to figure out how to explain to those kids where their mom went. And somewhere in that same city, on that same Wednesday, the person authorities would eventually name as her killer was moving through the world as if nothing had happened. That person was Brion D. Bess, 23 years old, a woman from Swansea, Illinois, a suburb about 10 to 15 minutes from East St. Louis, depending on traffic, a quiet residential community, not a place that generates a lot of violent crime headlines, not a place most people outside the region would even know existed. Here's where the case gets psychologically interesting. Brion Bess was not arrested the same day. She was not caught fleeing the scene. She was not found with a weapon. Investigators spent 2 full days, 48 hours, building their case before they moved on her. And when they did move, they moved with confidence. They went to the St. Clair County State's Attorney's Office with what they had, and the prosecutor charged Bess with first-degree murder the same day she was arrested. That's not a coincidence. Prosecutors don't file Class M felony charges, the most serious category in Illinois law, on the same day as an arrest unless they believe the evidence they have is solid. First-degree murder in Illinois carries a potential for significant prison time, and in some cases, natural life. You don't put your name on that charge without being sure. So what did they find in those 48 hours? What connected Brion Bess, a 23-year-old woman from a suburban community across the river, to a broad daylight shooting at a stop sign in East St. Louis? That's the question, isn't it? Because authorities have not told us. Not publicly. There has been no press conference where investigators walked through the evidence. There's been no court filing made public that lays out what they found. There's a booking photo, a charge sheet, and a jail cell in St. Clair County. And there's a family still trying to bury their daughter while figuring out how to raise her children. But let's think about what the speed of this arrest actually suggests. When police identify a suspect within 2 days of a shooting, there are typically a few categories of evidence that make that possible. Surveillance footage is one. East St. Louis, like most urban areas, has a network of cameras. Traffic cameras, business cameras, residential doorbell cameras. A vehicle or a person captured near the intersection around 1 p.m. on June 3rd could give investigators an enormous lead almost immediately. Another possibility is witness testimony. A shooting at a stop sign in the middle of the day is a public event. Someone may have seen something. Someone may have seen a person approach Nikaja's vehicle. Someone may have seen a car that didn't belong. And in cases where investigators move fast, a witness who saw something and reported it can compress a timeline dramatically. There's also digital evidence, phone records, social media, location data. In 2026, our phones carry a record of almost everywhere we go and everyone we contact. If there was any prior communication between Bess and Johnson, any texts, any calls, any interaction on social platforms, investigators with the right warrants can surface that within hours. What's particularly striking about this case is that Brion Bess was arrested at all. In the city of East St. Louis, the homicide clearance rate, like in many similarly resourced cities, has historically been a challenge. Arrests don't always come this fast, or at all. The fact that ISP's PSEG unit was brought in and cracked this in 48 hours suggests one of two things. Either the evidence pointing to Bess was overwhelming from the start, or the connection between Bess and Johnson was already known, meaning investigators didn't have to search far to find their suspect. They may have known where to look. And if that's true, if the connection between these two women existed before June 3rd, then this wasn't random. This was personal. That word hangs in the air, doesn't it? Personal. Because here's what we know and what we have to sit with. A 23-year-old woman from the suburbs allegedly drove to East St. Louis in the early afternoon and shot a 24-year-old mother through her car window while she was stopped to sign. And 2 days later, she was in handcuffs. Not because she confessed, not because she turned herself in, but because investigators found her. What does that tell us about the psychology of this act? What was the emotional state of someone who executes something like this in daylight, in public, and then goes back to their life in Swansea for 48 hours? Was it impulsive? Was it planned? Did Bess think she had gotten away with it? Or was she waiting, already knowing the knock on the door was coming? These are not just dramatic questions. These are behavioral windows through which we understand what actually happened before June 3rd. Because shootings like this, targeted midday with a clean getaway, don't usually come out of nowhere. They come at the end of something. A conflict, a relationship, a grievance that built over time until it became something irreversible. What was the something that ended Nikaja Johnson's life at a stop sign on a Wednesday afternoon? What was it between these two women that we still don't know? Think about the geography for a moment. Brion Bess didn't live in East St. Louis. She lived in Swansea, a different community, across a jurisdictional line, with its own streets and its own daily rhythms. For her to be at that specific intersection, at that specific time of day, something had to bring her there. You don't accidentally end up at the corner of Ridge and 25th at 1 p.m. on a Wednesday. You are either following someone or you already know where they're going to be. Both of those possibilities are deeply unsettling. Following someone requires intent and preparation. Knowing someone's location requires intimacy, the kind of familiarity that comes from a shared life, a shared circle, a shared history of some kind. Either way, what you're describing is not a random encounter. You're describing something that was, at some level, anticipated. And that is what makes this case so psychologically heavy. Because it means that somewhere in Nikaja's world, in her contacts, in her history, in the people she knew or used to know, there was a threat she may not have recognized as a threat. Or maybe she did recognize it, and didn't know how close it had gotten. We don't know. And that uncertainty is its own kind of haunting. Her mother, Brandy, is now raising 2 grandchildren. She launched a GoFundMe asking for help with funeral costs, writing that she needed to lay her baby to rest with dignity and class, while also figuring out how to care for the 2 little lives that Nikaja left behind. That sentence alone, the weight inside it, is something I keep coming back to because this isn't just a case. This is a grandmother doing 2 of the hardest things a human being can do at the same time, grieving a child and raising children simultaneously because of one person's choice on one Wednesday afternoon. Brion Bess is 23 years old. She is sitting in the St. Clair County Jail right now. She has not made a public statement. Her defense attorney, if she has one retained, has not spoken to the press. The motive has not been officially disclosed. The case is in its earliest stages and will move through the Illinois court system over the coming months, possibly longer. There will be hearings. There will be filings. There will be a moment where more of the story becomes public record. And when that happens, we will be here. But right now, today, I want to leave you with the questions that I think matter most. Not about the legal case, about the human one. Because before the lawyers and the courtrooms, before the charges and sentences, this was 2 young women whose lives intersected in a way that ended one of them. And we don't know why yet. So here's what I want you to think about and drop in the comments below. When 2 people who clearly weren't strangers end up here, one dead at a stop sign, one charged with a murder, what do you think was at the root of it? What story does your gut tell you? What have you seen play out like this before in cases you followed? Leave your theory below. Be specific. Be honest. This community catches things that the mainstream coverage misses, and your perspective on this one genuinely matters. If this is your first time on Mystora Crimes, this is exactly what we do every single time. We don't just report the surface. We go underneath it. We ask the questions that make people uncomfortable because those are the only questions worth asking. Subscribe. Hit the bell. Come back when this case develops because we will be covering every new detail as it drops. For Kajha Johnson, for her children, for her mother Brandy. We don't move on until there are real answers. And we're just getting started